Close results in Paterson vote plagued by fraud claims. Over 3,000 ballots seemingly set aside. A county spokesman said 16,747 vote-by-mail ballots were received, but the county's official result page shows 13,557 votes were counted, with uncounted ballots representing 19% of all votes cast. And do you know why these 3,000 ballots were disqualified? The signatures on the ballots did not match the signatures of the same individuals from previous elections. Nearly 20% of the election was deemed to be, let's just be light and say the ballots were completely disqualified. But this kind of thing doesn't happen, we're told. There's no mail fraud, we're told. What's this? Department of Justice says letter carrier charged with attempted election fraud. Oh, this guy was changing party affiliations on absentee ballot requests? I thought this thing never happened. Which brings us to the lead story. Donald Trump says that Twitter is interfering in the 2020 presidential election. They're saying my statement on mail-in ballots, which will lead to massive corruption and fraud, is incorrect, based on fact-checking by fake news CNN and the Amazon Washington Post. The main issue here is, first and foremost, mail fraud is happening right now. These stories are right now. I live in New Jersey. Paterson is up north, and people are very angry. One woman said that one of her relatives had been in Florida for weeks, yet somehow was counted as having voted. It happens. Does it mean it's guaranteed to happen? No. But Donald Trump didn't tweet that it is a fact, it is shown. Donald Trump tweeted his opinion about what may happen if we implement nationwide nationwide mail-in voting. Trump basically said, if we have nationwide mail-in voting, there will be fraud. It's an opinion. Twitter placed a fact check on his tweet, but it wasn't actually a fact check as reported by so many outlets. It was actually just a link to the opinions of left-wing journalists working for CNN and the Washington Post, stating as a matter of fact, without evidence, that voter fraud doesn't happen. Except I literally just showed you evidence that it does. If Donald Trump saw these stories and in his opinion concluded widespread national mail-in voting would lead to more fraud, I would argue that he is likely correct. But it is just an opinion. How do you fact check an opinion? And why would Twitter take this action? Well, it would seem that Trump is right. Twitter, whether intentionally or for whatever reason, is interfering in this election by linking a Trump tweet to the opinions of people who don't like Trump. Yet when Joe Biden launched his campaign with a lie, and this shouldn't be shocking to anybody, many people, many politicians, they lie in all their videos. They embellish, they lie. Well, Joe Biden actually edited a clip out of context. They didn't fact check that at all. Yet when Trump gives his opinion, they redirect to the opinion of somebody else claiming it's a fact check. Now that is bias and that is interference. And Twitter just made a very, very serious mistake. Let's be real. Twitter is comprised of two factions of the culture war. You've got the right culture war, the left culture, whatever the subcategories are. But are there very many active middle ground people who haven't already decided or don't already dislike one of the other factions? I think it's ridiculous. Even I, the enlightened centrist milquetoast fence sitter, have typical disdain for the Democrats. So who are they trying to win over by doing this? Certainly not me, right? All they've actually done is proven that they are biased beyond a reasonable doubt, because they aren't issuing these fact checks, for the most part, to the rivals of Donald Trump. Let's read through the story, and I want to show you exactly what's going on, what they claim, who they're linking to, and I want to show you evidence. There actually is evidence of voter fraud, and it's happening. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are several ways you can give, but the best thing you can do is share this video. I'm competing with the mainstream media, and many of these companies will tell you there's no evidence of voter fraud. When you actually look to the affiliates, credible local news agencies, we can see it's actually happening. But CNN and the Washington Post would counter that. Now, these platforms have massive marketing budgets and they're competing with me. And it's a lot harder for me to get traction, especially with YouTube's algorithm pushing down my content and propping theirs up. If you really want to help, share this content. But if you just want to watch, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let's read the news. From CBS, Twitter flags Trump tweet with fact-checking label for first time. That's the headline, but it's not true. It's not a fact-checking headline. What do they call it? Fact-checking label. Sorry. It is not a fact-checking label. It is a redirect to someone else's opinion, which is weird. Twitter on Tuesday added a fact-checking label to a tweet by President Trump, the first time the social media platform has used such a label for the president's tweets. The tweet now includes a link directing users to information debunking the president's false claims about mail-in voting. No, it doesn't. It literally doesn't. Trump didn't make a false claim. He gave his opinion on what will happen. This is ridiculous. This is amazing. Twitter added the label to two tweets Mr. Trump posted Tuesday morning, in which he alleged that mail-in ballots will be substantially fraudulent and result in a rigged election. There was no evidence of widespread fraud in voting by mail, but Mr. Trump had been spreading his unfounded claims for weeks as more states expand mail-in voting during the coronavirus pandemic. How strange that CBS would say something that's not true. Well, it's not strange, right? This is why I opened this segment with two stories. One about voter fraud in Paterson, New Jersey, and another about a mail carrier who is now being accused of trying to alter absentee ballot requests. There are many other stories. Absentee ballots and mail-in ballots appearing in other states, appearing in bundles in locations where they're not allowed to be bundled. Yeah, it's happening. Now, a lot of the people arguing for mail-in voting are acting like there's no difference between absentee ballots and what Trump is talking about. But we'll get to that. Let me show you Trump's tweet. Trump said there is no way, zero, that mail-in ballots will be anything less than substantially fraudulent. Mailboxes will be robbed, ballots will be forged, and even illegally printed out and fraudulently signed. The governor of California is sending ballots to millions of people. Here's my question. How do you fact check a future event? Can you answer that for me, Twitter, CBS, anybody? How do you fact check someone's prediction of a future event that didn't happen yet? If someone came out and said, I guarantee X will happen, you still can't fact check that because, well, we know no one really knows it's going to happen. And even if, when I said in 2018, I think Republicans will win, they didn't. Fact check. Tim Pool was wrong. Right, but it wasn't wrong in that context. What they're saying makes literally no sense, and it's very weird. These claims are unsubstantiated according to CNN and Washington Post and others. The page says, experts say mail-in ballots are very rarely linked to voter fraud. Is that what Trump said? Did Trump say they weren't rarely linked to voter fraud? No, Twitter just intervened to share this page. When you go to Trump's tweet, you are greeted with a link that says learn about voter fraud. You get this message. Trump makes unsubstantiated claim that mail-in ballots will lead to voter fraud. How is it unsubstantiated when we have this story from NBC New York? There's a couple things that we're going to get to in this. First and foremost, is Trump right about voter fraud? Well, he gave his opinion. How do you say someone's opinion on what will happen is wrong? I don't know. But there is evidence to suggest that voter fraud has occurred with such small-scale mail-in voting. This is where the duplicitous nature of the argument comes from and why Twitter has actually intervened or interfered in the election. When it comes to absentee ballots, we're talking about an exemption for certain people to mail in their vote, and it's done in a secure way. And there are still problems with this, and there are still concerns. We're talking about taking our entire voting system nationwide and implementing straight mail-in voting. It's what Nancy Pelosi wants. California, Michigan, these states are doing this as well. We're talking about taking something that is a tiny fraction of the total vote and expanding it to literally everyone. What percentage of elections use mail-in ballots? Take that, divide it by the amount of times we've seen, or do the math, to put it simply. How many times have we seen mail-in voter fraud? It might not be widespread, and that's an argument. That's an opinion about what constitutes widespread or not. But take a look at what Twitter did. First, they showed this story from The Hill. Trump blasts California over mail-in voting following a Republican lawsuit. The Hill tends to be okay. But then we have this post from Jennifer Jacobs. She is a senior White House reporter for Bloomberg who says Trump says mail-in voting system in California will be substantially fraudulent, raising more questions about whether this is a voter suppression effort. Who raised the question? You? Why is this the second tweet? Your opinion? That Trump may be trying to suppress the vote? Analysis from the Washington Post. A review of Trump's many unsubstantiated allegations of voter fraud. Hold on. Why are you linking to an analysis piece? That's not a fact check. This woman did not offer a fact check. Here's the real reason Donald Trump is attacking mail-in ballots. Analysis by Chris Cillizza. What? None of these are fact-based claims. They're just opinions of people who don't like Trump. Grace Segers. Mail-in voting fraud is extremely rare, and some experts consider it to be safer than in-person voting because paper ballots can't be hacked. Except what we've already seen in certain locations is that people can take your ballot and throw it in the trash. Here's what I explained the other day when I talked about voter fraud. What happens if you get a mail carrier working at the post office and a box of ballots comes in, or a bunch of ballots come in from a Republican or Democrat district? And so this person just kicks the box under a desk and those ballots are gone. Now, some people would argue that's absurd. Why would a post office carrier do something like this? Tell me. I don't know. Why would a letter carrier try to attempt election fraud? This story from The Hill. Federal prosecutors on Tuesday said a West Virginia letter carrier committed attempted election fraud by altering party affiliations from Democrat to Republican on requests for absentee ballots. The clerk of Pendleton County in April received seemingly altered requests from 8 voters, 5 of which had been changed from Democrat to Republican. The request was altered, but the party was unchanged on the other 3, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of West Virginia. The alterations appeared to have been made with a black pen, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The man, Thomas Cooper of Pendleton County, admitted to altering requests and said it was intended as a joke. Cooper was responsible for mail delivery for the 3 towns from which the doctored requests were mailed: Onego, Franklin, and Riverton. Now, many of you may say, Tim, it was only 8 votes. Sure, this guy should be arrested, but what could 8 votes really do? I don't know. Let's take a look at what happened in Paterson, New Jersey. Amid widespread vote-by-mail fraud allegations in the Paterson City Council election, one race was apparently decided by just 8 votes. Now you see why I thought these stories were the ones to pick to give you an example of why voter fraud is possible, serious, and why it should be considered. Apparently, this DOJ allegation is that the man was changing people from Democrat to Republicans. So tell me this. We have evidence of voter fraud, and there was another case where a guy was actually a Republican who was trying to cheat. Why would the Democrats be for this? Why would the Republicans be against it? Well, let's be real. Republicans may not be condoning that some Republicans have done this. In fact, they're saying end the loophole, right? Why would Democrats be in favor of something that's hurt them in the past? Doesn't seem to make sense to me. So whether or not you would like to believe the issue, I think it's fair to point out Twitter intervened in an opinion by the president and nobody else. So what does that mean? Honestly, I don't know, because to be honest, I really don't think they're going to sway anyone's opinion. This was a big mistake by Twitter. Donald Trump has been tweeting about Joe Scarborough, and I called it Joe derangement syndrome. I really don't care for these tweets. But some people responded that Trump is basically goading Twitter to keep taking these actions because Trump has now called out Twitter for their censorship. In a tweet, Donald Trump says, Republicans feel that social media platforms totally silence conservative voices. We will strongly regulate or close them down before we can ever allow this to happen. We saw what they attempted to do and failed in 2016. We can't let a more sophisticated version of that happen again. Just like we can't let large-scale mail-in ballots take root in our country. It would be a free-for-all on cheating, forgery, and the theft of ballots. Whoever cheated the most would win. Likewise, social media, clean up your act now. Scott Adams made the point. You may be familiar. He's the creator of Dilbert. He said, when you ask someone to take your ballot to the mailbox, you have not voted. That person has now voted twice. The first, when they filled out their mail-in ballot and then mailed it. The second, when they decided whether or not to put your ballot in the mailbox. But think about it. This is another problem we see with ballot harvesting, people collecting ballots on behalf of a certain group or whatever. But if we have mail-in ballots, someone could go around collecting or with ballot harvesting and say, well, bring your ballots in, go to an all-Democrat district, and then just dump them in the river. This is why we have serious problems with or I should say, this is why there are serious concerns about voter fraud. Look, I just given you several examples. So yes, Twitter is taking a bold action, and they probably shouldn't. But following questions about this fact check, it turns out that one of the people at Twitter who runs this is overtly biased against the president. So listen, man, they like to say there's no bias against conservatives on social media. Well, we now have hard proof. In this story from Fox News, Twitter exec in charge of efforts to fact check Trump has history of anti-Trump posts, called McConnell a, quote, bag of farts. Well then, Fox says, Twitter's head of site integrity, Yoel Roth, boasts on his LinkedIn that he is in charge of developing and enforcing Twitter's rules, like the one that led Twitter to slap a new misleading warning label on 2 of President Trump's tweets concerning mail-in votes on Tuesday. However, Roth's own barrage of anti-Trump politically charged tweets seemingly calls into question whether he should be creating guidelines for the president and other Twitter users, especially when Twitter is under fire for its alleged left-wing bias. Commentators have argued that Trump's tweets on the risks of mail-in voting were not misleading, and the president accused Twitter of seeking to interfere in the upcoming election under the guise of supposedly neutral fact-checking policy. Roth had previously referred to Trump and his team as, let's just call them, we'll call them actual, he called them actual Nazis. There it is. It's straight up. He mocked Trump supporters by saying that we fly over those states that voted for a racist tangerine for a reason, and called Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell a personality-free bag of farts. Last August, Twitter suspended McConnell's Twitter account, prompting the GOP to threaten to cut off advertising on the site until Twitter relented. In September 2016, Roth tweeted, "I've never donated to a presidential campaign before, but I just gave $100 to Hillary for America. We can't F around anymore." When Trump won the November 2016 election, Roth dejectedly chalked the development up to Bernie Sanders' protest voters and racism before sounding more optimistic notes. Okay, you get the point. I don't need to read everything he's ever tweeted. We get it. He's a Hillary Clinton donor. He hates Donald Trump. He's insulted Trump's family. He's insulted Kellyanne Conway. And Twitter is absolutely biased. And we know Twitter is biased. So when Twitter makes a move like this to fact check the president, and it results in you being directed to mainstream media that lie, they lie. But you know what? Let's not even play that game. When you get directed to the opinions of people who don't like the president, the people who claim there are questions about voter suppression, you have to wonder what their intent really is. Joe Biden actually launched his campaign with a lie. It's called the Very Fine People hoax. Donald Trump had condemned a group of fairly nasty people, but defended other people who were in Charlottesville. It's a big event. I'm not going to get into the full context, but he defended the people there who weren't there with malintent for the most part. The media lied about it, and they continued to do so, and Joe Biden lied about it. Joe Biden actually took comments from Trump and mashed them together. Why wasn't that fact-checked? Well, you could argue that Twitter didn't have the policy in place, but Joe Biden continues to lie. He's done numerous interviews where he's continued to lie, and even progressives have called him out for lying. Why is it then that Trump is the one who faces the brunt? We know for a fact the people who work at Twitter are biased against him and saying very nasty things about the president and the people who work for him. And that brings me to the last story. Well, actually, I got a couple more, but we'll go through this one first. Podcast host unverified after interviewing controversial GOP candidate. I mean, that's the story. A guy has a show called Wrong Opinion. He interviewed a very controversial figure, Laura Loomer. I believe it was Laura Loomer. And what happened? His verification badge was removed. Now, I'm going to be very careful on this one because I try to make sure I can verify everything. It's possible he removed his verification badge on his own. You can do that. I don't think that's likely. I think Twitter actually removed his verification badge. It's hard to know for sure. But with all the evidence we've seen, why would I doubt what he's saying? I wouldn't. It actually stands to reason he's telling the truth. For the longest time, social media has been biased not just against conservatives, but anybody who dare oppose their weird social justice religion type orthodoxy, the dogma, whatever. There have been anti-war activists who have been suspended as well. Occupy Wall Street activists who have been suspended as well. So it's not just about conservatives, but it tends to be. And because of this, I think the conservatives are going to, in a sense, reap what they have sown. I know people like Ted Cruz and, I believe Matt Gaetz and Josh Hawley have brought up the issue of social media censorship in the past. But right now, the Republicans haven't really done anything. And Donald Trump coming out saying that they're going to shut things down, it's empty words. Empty words. I warned years ago that if Republicans did not take this seriously, they wouldn't get reelected. Because social media is the way in which we communicate for the most part. The stories that dominate the news bubble up on social media, not just Twitter, but Facebook and YouTube and other places as well. Videos go viral. We don't go to the town center anymore. We're not going to the water cooler. Many people aren't going to church. And because of this, we are not getting our speech and our discourse and discussions in public settings. And especially with the coronavirus pandemic, we are now mostly doing things remotely or virtual. In the end, It's worse than I could have even predicted. Basically, the pandemic. Now, it's possible the pandemic restrictions get lifted and things get better, but it doesn't seem like we're going to be having, mass gatherings without protest for at least till the next year. So think about my warning early on that Republicans needed to get serious about social media censorship. I'm talking about the politicians. Otherwise, they'd never win again. And then look what happened this year. A pandemic hit. And now the only way to actually have these conversations is through social media. Well, unfortunately for the conservatives, many of their biggest supporters, many of the biggest conservative accounts have been purged. And what has anyone done about it? Now, it's fair to say perhaps there's nothing that can be done about it in the sense of regulation or laws. It would be very, very difficult to actually get something on the books to protect speech on social media without lawsuits going through the courts. Until we have that, I don't know where we go. And many of these lawsuits are being struck down. So we need a lawsuit that's going to make its way to the Supreme Court until a precedent is set. The issue with social media is that they're allowed to be biased because they're companies. How do you change this fact? I don't know, especially when the Democrats are benefiting from it. So they refuse to actually adhere to any kind of principle. I have always been a center-lefty kind of person. I believe in regulation. I think it's important when businesses get out of control and start stealing the commons, for instance, that we say, hey, you can't do that. But for some reason, these people that normally would be supporting regulation oppose it and respond that private businesses can do what they want, which is so strange because it's something the Republicans would have said 10, 20 years ago. That's where their opinion goes. It's all about power. So here I am, same position I've always been in. We need to defend free speech. How do you do that? I honestly don't know, because the reason Twitter can be biased is because of the First Amendment. The government can't make a law about what they're allowed to do, but the courts can rule, and there will have to be legislation, and there will have to be some kind of Supreme Court ruling, I suppose. But there'll have to be a case and a lawsuit. And for the time being, I don't think anyone can do anything. I really don't. There's one thing that can be done outside of legislation. So let me clarify that last statement. There's nothing anyone can do for now in terms of legislation. Donald Trump could just leave the platform. If Trump left Twitter and started posting things on, say, Minds, for instance, MINDS, then the media would be forced to cover it and people would flock to a different site, and that would completely disrupt Twitter. Yet for some reason, Trump doesn't do it. Instead, he just goes on Twitter and says, we're going to do something, and then never does. Never does. So what's the point in saying it? I honestly don't know. But I will tell you, I do have serious concerns about Twitter's bias and their interference in an election. In the end, I think it'll ultimately benefit Trump. Why? Because if they ignored what Trump was saying, nobody would care. By adding this tag, they're not convincing anyone on the left that Trump is wrong. They're convincing everyone that the media platform is biased against Trump for not fact-checking other people. And now there's hard evidence of it. So you can argue, but Twitter is just fact-checking Trump. And it's like, well, it was an opinion. Linking to an opinion. Those aren't fact checks. And besides, why apply it to no one else? Well, because Trump is wrong. Certainly other people have been wrong. Many high-profile personalities have been wrong. Well, he's the president. What about presidential candidates who have been wrong? What about, say, Kamala Harris? Do you like her? No. It's about power. And they don't want to give up their power. And so long as that's the case, they're not going to act on principle. I guess we'll see how things play out. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. at youtube.com/TimCastNews. And I'll see you all then.